I'm Lauren Coffey, speaking of, and I'm here to talk to Nick today about funding and startups and all the fun things. So thanks for coming out to us and everyone online. Hello. You want to dive right in?
Sure. Yeah, let's go.
I know we have a short amount of time, so just tell us who you are, what your experience is with startups and funding, and kind of why you wanted to get involved in this fun little world.
So I'm an attorney. I'm a shareholder at Hillward Henderson here in Tampa. Our firm is about 115 lawyers here in Tampa. I'm in the corporate group, and I focus on really helping startups, investors, and founders who are working on growth oriented companies. Um, and we're with a full complement of team of subject matter experts at our firm. But my focus is really on capital raising, corporate governance, and kind of general corporate work for startups and advising investors as well.
Okay. So we're just going to go through kind of what happens when you try to get funding. So let's say you're a startup founder and you're just thinking about it. What's the first step they should take to make sure they don't get in trouble later on?
Yeah. So I mean, first step is really is similar things you're going to do whenever you're starting any business, right? So you're going to want to set up your company, do all the normal kind of corporate building blocks types of things, make sure that your business is protected, you're protected. At the outset, it's not really uh, you know eh, you're prepping for fundraising the moment you start the company. But that being said, and I think we'll talk about this some later on too. But there are certain things you may want to do if you're on that track. You're setting up your company to go out quickly, raise capital. The startup world is to a large extent, especially in an early stage, kind of commodified or commoditized. Where investors look for a certain or prefer to invest in a certain sort of structure. They expect to see certain things, and so understanding those things up front and having them in place can help smooth the process.
Okay. So they do that, and now they're going to meet with VCs. What is the next step they should take? What are some things they should look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about those first meetings with VCs, and I think from a business perspective, this is probably going to be talked about by another panel, I think today. But from the legal point of view, there's an interrelationship there with what kind of terms they're looking for, what's the structure of your investment going to be. So as you go to meet with investors, and a lot of this is stage dependent, obviously, but when you go to meet with investors, having an idea of what sort of the playbook is looking like for you from a capital raising perspective going forward, not just at that first step, but being able to say in those initial conversations, yeah, our plan is we're going to raise, $500,000 million in a safe or a note, and then we're going to, that's going to get us to, prove out the product, be delivering it, have kind of verifiable recurring revenue numbers, and then we're gonna do a seed round or an A round in 12 months or 18 months or whatever it might be, and being able to just understand what you're talking about at a high level on those things and having an idea of what that's going to be. That's what's going to come up in those early conversations. I think in the second order, third order type of conversations, when you start to get a little more in the weeds, potentially, at least having being conversant with the terms associated with the different types of investments that an investor might want to make or that you might want to have the investor make. And so that would be, kind of understanding what it means to have, participating preferred, what it means, how does a safe work? How does a note actually work in terms of the conversion terms? Those types of things that you want to have at least a reasonable understanding of, be able to talk to them about and understand what they look for. So if it's and again, this is not something you're going to talk about in initial conversations, but as you get a little bit further down the road, being able to understand, okay, what do you guys normally look for? How do you structure, your preferred stock rounds? What do you normally look for on that? Is it a participating preferred? Is it straight preferred? The understanding what those things mean, because that has a real, those are real significant top line kind of economic points that you might be focused on talking about valuation, but when you settle on a valuation number and the investor comes back later and says, well, you're going to have a 20% pre-money option pool. Do you know what that means? You know that's really, you're basically repricing the deal at that point. So having a good understanding of that, having advisors that you can talk to about those things, and not get blindsided when you ultimately see everything laid out in a cap table or in a waterfall model, and realize that your economics are not really what you thought they were going to be.
Do your homework basically
Right. Right.
beforehand. You touched on this a little bit, but on the flip side with the VCs, what is something that they may get scared of when they see the founder come in, or that would be a bonus for them? I'm like, oh, we really need to work with them.
I mean, from a legal perspective, they're probably not going to look at your company and say, "Wow, they did a great job on their legal formalities. I definitely want to invest in this company." But they're like I said before, they're going to look for they want things to be checked the box, right? Because they're focused on the business, the economics, and so they say, "Look, we're talking about an institutional investor, institutional venture capital fund. Almost every time they're going to prefer you to be in a Delaware C corp. They're going to hope you have in place, the basic building blocks of employee agreements and your intellectual properties squared away. They don't want to spend a lot of time bogged down in cleanup matters, and they don't want you to be spending that time in the legal spend associated with that. An initial equity raise, and you spend six figures in legal fees doing cleanup work. That's not in anybody's interest. But most of that's not gonna scare them away. Most of that stuff can get fixed or changed, and usually there's not a significant cost to doing so. The things that are really scary are major capitalization issues. So, you've gone out and raised a bunch of money over a few years and a bunch of different notes with different terms, or maybe you have a cap table that already has, from friends and family and early investors, 50 or 60 people on it. Maybe you have securities issues associated with how you raise money. That you have a whole bunch of non-accredited investors and things like that that could be difficult to navigate. And especially when it comes to errors or terms that you've given to early investors that a VC coming in is going to say that's got to go, and if you can't get it changed, you can't get a deal done. Things like giving an early investor liquidation preference multiples, or having like I said before, a whole slew of notes that are on all sorts of different terms. You have valuation caps all over the place, and now you got to come and sort that out. And the investors coming in and saying, well, if we do this deal and all that stuff converts, you as a founder have 10% of the company left, and so we got to go back to the table and renegotiate that, because I'm not going to invest in a company where the founder doesn't have more skin in the game.
Yeah. There's just a lot going on. Um, so, I mean, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Are there any surprises that you have seen kind of time and time again where the founder is just like, okay, that was unexpected?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of two buckets on that. One is um, surprises that are on the legal side. Things they've done that might come back to haunt them at the fundraising stage, that they really just weren't expecting. So, a lot of times, for instance, there are issues. People will you get good advice that, look, you form an LLC when you're starting out, and you can always convert it later to a C corp if a VC wants you to, and that's true. The problem is, how far down the road do you get with that LLC, and what all have you done? Have you put in place, employee equity? Have you run up a bunch of, and this is kind of in the weeds, but accumulated losses as a partner? Because now you're in a partnership, you have multiple people in that LLC, and do you understand the tax consequences of partnership tax and accounting, and how all that's going to work when you convert that entity? Because there are a lot of traps there for folks who aren't regularly talking to their tax advisors on that stuff. So that's one thing where, I've seen again and again where, an LLC that's kind of carried on for a long time and raised money in that LLC, and then you go to convert it, and there's just like a host of tax traps, and some of them just don't can't fix, and it's just there's going to be consequences there. I think the other big kind of main bucket of surprises is, or I should say, also on that, if you have raised a bunch of money in convertible instruments, notes and safes, and then you go to convert those things in an equity round, and the investor's saying, well, that's all got to convert, in the pre-money. Basically, I'm not taking, as an investor, I'm not taking any dilution from the conversion of these notes and safes you may have done on whatever terms, and so that's all going to be a pre-money conversion. And and you also just haven't modeled out, how all that stuff's going to convert, and you end up looking at that cap table, pro forma cap table, as they say, in connection with a term sheet, and you say, well, I am taking a hell of a lot more dilution than I thought I was going to be. You factor in things like the option pools and all that stuff, and you can end up with a lot less of the company than you were hoping at an early stage, at a seed or an A round, And then the other thing I think is surprising to some folks is sometimes the terms and framework of, venture capital terms. There's kind of a relatively standard approach overall, high level, and if you're not already familiar, you will at some point be familiar with, National Venture Capital Association, NVCA, type framework, and that's all built around really protecting minority investors in a company with kind of the background presumption that you as a founder, are the principal owner and operator of the company. And so there's not a lot in there that says like you're affirmatively protected in this way or that way. You don't necessarily have approval rights over things and things like that. So understanding that framework, I think sometimes people get a little bit surprised by that and want to try to push for things that they totally reasonably feel like should be in there, but are really going to be non-starters. And so adjusting expectations, I think, at that point, and just understanding what you're getting into is important.
Yeah, definitely. Good advice. Is there something that has been increasingly important over the last 10 years where it may not have mattered to founders or investors a decade ago, but now is like an absolute?
I mean, one thing that this may change going forward, but and this is, if you haven't heard already, you will, I'm sure, at some point. It's now getting more attention, kind of in the press and stuff, because it's potentially on the chopping block to a certain extent, is qualified small business stock treatment. And so this is, it kind of relates to the choice of entity thing as well, which is, if you're in a C corp, um, and you qualify as a small business, then the stock issued, while you are still qualifying as a small business within the definition, is potentially, the way things are now anyway, uh, your gain on that could be completely tax exempt. But that is changing. There are other kind of surcharges and things that have been put, but anyway, in any event, that may be reduced to 50%. That's been talked about, so that may be de-emphasized a little bit going forward. But I think if we compare now to 10 years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago wasn't really on a lot of people's radars. They improved the treatment of QSBS during the Trump tax reform, and so it's that's something that's been a real focus. And in the last probably 5-6 years, there was model terms around making sure your stock is QSBS eligible and all these things, and it's also why it's one of the reasons why investors now will say, look, we're not going to do the kinds of things we might have done to get around the fact that you're an LLC, and we want you have to be a C corp because that QSBS treatment is really important to us.
Okay. I know you mentioned a lot of different terms. You mentioned NCV and National Venture Capital Association. Are there other resources people can like go to learn more about these things, or should they just hire a lawyer and call it good?
I mean, I would say, do both, and not necessarily just even hire a lawyer, but having a conversation with somebody who you've met through your network, and know that they're experienced. But I think the NVCA resources are great, but they're a little tech. They're not designed for lay people to have them be accessible. But they have a model term sheet that's annotated, that has information on kind of market terms, and it's a very useful resource if you can navigate that and spend a little time on Google, kind of googling what some of the lingo means and all that kind of stuff. But that's great. And then also there are so many blogs out there by VCs, by real high profile VCs and all that really break down a lot of the aspects of capital raising and the nitty gritty of terms and kind of cap table algebra type of things, so you can understand and try to model on your own and project out what you're going to own of your company if you raise money in certain valuations or terms and that kind of thing. So, the internet's your friend in most cases, but um, in this case in particular, I think the internet is your friend, and there's a lot out there. I mean, when I started doing this stuff about 10 years ago or so, that was even then I spent a lot of my time just educating myself on this stuff by just reading everything you could find, and obviously, Brad Feld's post, a gazillion books, and the Venture Deals book is still kind of a great kind of entry level resource to understanding, the ins and outs of the legal side of venture deals.
Okay, great. Well, very informative. Thank you so much. We are out of time, but if you have any questions, I'm sure he's available after to chat.
Yeah, I'll be around.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you for having us.